Alright, so here it is late at night. I got my Oilers hat on, my Avalanche jersey on, just to tick people off. Before I get started, there's something I've noticed. Now, I did the looking at each Canadian team videos, and a funny thing has happened. Leafs fans seem to have accepted their lot in life. Their biggest problem with my video is that my depth chart looks wrong. Oh, and I turned the computer around because I thought having the TV over my shoulder and it being on sports might help the people who can't focus. And just like the length of time, I'd have like some bikini show on if I had those kinds of channels, but I don't. But Canucks fans argue with me about whether or not Virtanen should be on the lineup. Flames fans are fine. Oilers fans mostly are fine. In fact, Oilers fans and Maple Leafs fans seem to think I'm too optimistic about their team's chances. But Senators fans, oh shit. They can't handle that their team's not good enough. And today, free agent day, they did nothing to address the fact their team isn't good enough. And it's funny because when I get around to doing my second round of NHL predictions and I get into the meat of things, I know I'm going to predict Ottawa to finish probably at the bottom of the division, and I'm going to get a lot of heat from Senators fans. The funny thing is, I am a Senators fan. They're not in my top three, but they're fourth. But it's hard when you see a team working with an internal cap and they can't upgrade anything because they can't afford to. And it's like, I know you're in a Canadian market and I know the Canadian dollar's down, but seriously, you can't do anything to fix the problem? And it honestly is simple. The Bobby Ryan contract was the mistake. The Bobby Ryan contract was the knee-jerk reaction to losing Stamkos. It was like, well, we've lost one big name. We can't lose the other. So we're going to sign Bobby Ryan to too much money. And Ryan will never play up to that contract. And because they're paying the big money there, they can't put the big money anywhere else. Ottawa wasn't even mentioned in any rumors today at all. And while other teams around them are making moves to get better, I mean, as much as I might think Radulov is a risk, it's a move Bergevin made, and I fully respect Bergevin for putting his stamp on the team. Some GMs get slammed for it, and others get praised for it, and then 3 years later, it's all reversed, and the one that was getting praised gets fired. In fact, I was going to do one thing in here, but let's do something else, because there's an interesting prelude here. 91-92, the Vancouver Canucks turned it around. This is the before 91-92, before they turned it around. A season where they would have 96 points at a time when there was no loser point. Okay, these are legitimate 96-point seasons. Turning the Vancouver Canucks around is akin to putting the brakes on a super tanker. You need lots of time and space to do it. After 4 years straining at the helm, Canuck President General Manager Pat Quinn has the good ship Canuck veering sideways. He had built some momentum and the franchise seemed closer to being on course. Believe it or not, this could be the team of the 90s in the Smythe division. But don't jump on the ship too fast. There's still a lot of work to be done and Vancouver is a year or two away. Statistically, the Canucks don't appear to have made much progress under Quinn. They finished with 59, 74, 64, and 65 points, extending the franchise's streak of losing seasons to a league record 15. Quinn was only 9-13-4 after he fired coach Bob McCammon January 31st and took over behind the bench. The Canucks somehow managed to qualify for the playoffs, edging Winnipeg in overtime in the 80th game of the season in the Turtle Derby for 4th place. I remember that. I remember my friend from Edmonton came to visit, and I remember it was the eve of that 80th game, and I said, man, I don't know if the Canucks can win this. They have to win to knock Winnipeg out. And he said they'll win it. And I said, why? He said, because it's Winnipeg. Winnipeg sucks, and Vancouver doesn't suck as bad, so they'll get in. And he was right. It's the same as my saying the Capitals are going to win the Cup because they're the Capitals. They never win the Cup. The Blues, they're not going to win the Cup. They're the Blues. Still, over the last month of the season, these turtles started to look like ninjas. Ninjas is capitalized. I don't think it has to be. Unless you're changing the name. I think ninjas, you can lowercase that shit. The Canucks became a team, as they did in their near upset of the Calgary Flames in the playoffs 2 years before. Joel Otto kicked that damn puck in. That's me adding that. It's not in the book. Vancouver grew immeasurably, both physically and emotionally. With some draft help and a couple of judicious trades, they finally began to look like a team with some bite and depth. Canucks ownership, believing in the team's potential rather than in past performance, rewarded Quinn with a 3-year contract extension at the end of the season. He had 1 year remaining. After a half-hearted attempt at finding his replacement as coach, Quinn decided to stay on for at least another year and hired 13-year veteran Stan Smyl and former Hartford coach Rick Lee as assistants. See? And then overall, Quinn's 5th season on the West Coast could be a breakthrough year, but the Canucks have a lot of ground to make up. With Winnipeg and San Jose in the Smythe, Vancouver should make the playoffs, but with Calgary, LA, and Edmonton in the division, 4th place appears to be as high as the team can aspire. They finished first. I think Calgary missed the playoffs that year. Just interesting how this works. All right, Year of Living Dangerously. It's only 6 minutes, so there's football over my shoulder if you want to watch highlights. On the ice, the NHL product. Now, think about it this way. This is 25 years ago. This is the NHL 75th season. Now we're going to the 100th. So think about parallels between what it's saying here and now, because there's some big ones. Okay. On the ice, the NHL product's never been better. The 75th anniversary season promises all sorts of tantalizing storylines played out by increasingly gifted performers. Yeri Curry's rejoined old friend Wayne Gretzky in Los Angeles, making the glamorous Kings even more of a marquee team. They didn't win a Stanley Cup, though, spoiler alert. If the Penguins survive the summer's free agent auction in one piece, the defending champions will be a pretty team to watch with a healthy Mario Lemieux directing an army of offensive stars. Sounds eerily familiar. Pittsburgh, they're over the cap, so they can't spend in free agency, so they could lose. And, Crosby's health's always a concern. Young Eastern Europeans such as Fedorov, McGillney, and Yager will continue to raise the league's overall skill level. And with Adam Oates by his side for a whole season, Brett Hull could bid for 100 goals with the St. Louis Blues. Impossible? Few people thought he could score 72 again, and he scored 86. What's a 14-goal increase? Well, it didn't happen, so it's impossible. Sorry. I'll go out on a limb. The dreary Quebec Nordiques could improve by as much as 30 points with star-in-waiting Eric Lindros, or whatever they'd get in return if he commands a trade. The Nordiques will improve without Lindros, thanks to Soviet right-winger Valery Kamensky, who will play on a line with emerging superstar Joe Sakic. Kamensky was one of my favorite players. I think I mentioned that in a previous video, but he was. Kamensky, when he was in the league, was one of my favorite players. In fact, this whole Moscow on the Seaway arrangement is intriguing. The Nords may have more good Soviet players than the Central Red Army. The startling playoff success of the Minnesota North Stars has saved the NHL's shakiest franchise and given the ordinary team hope. That shakiest franchise would move 3 years later. Ouch. What players like Stuart Gavin and Gaetan Duchesne, love Gaetan Duchesne, accomplished stands as tribute to diligent, honest hockey players everywhere. The league's escalating war on goon tactics and hooliganism should make it easier for the gifted players to work their magic. Sound familiar? Another round of rule changes was aimed at pugnacious bullies who make their living by attacking those who actually play the game. Also sounds familiar. And have you ever heard more good young players? Sakic, Recchi, Roenick, Leach, Stevens, Kevin Stevens, Theo Fleury, John Cullen, Craig Janney, Luc Robitaille, Pierre Turgeon. The list seems endless. Sound familiar? The league's never had more young talent. The 1991 Canada Cup will showcase much of that talent by bringing well-matched Canadian and U.S. teams into the international tourney. The NHL also finally approved the use of television instant replays to rule undisputed goals. Unfortunately, the league went about it in the usual half-hearted fashion, relying on available technology for each game rather than investing in a uniform net monitoring system. Expect application of the new replay rule to generate plenty of chaos this season. Yeah, instant replays become a completely perfect beast now, hasn't it? There's no problems with instant replay in NHL games anymore. This was 25 years ago. They straightened it out in the last 25 years, right? Speaking of chaos, developments off the ice haven't been quite as positive for hockey fans. Several troubling trends emerged which could put a damper on the 75th anniversary season. The potential for business-side disaster in the NHL hasn't been this great since the self-destructive era of the 1970s. Attendance flattened out after a decade of steady growth, and the alarming league-wide ticket price inflation continued. That doesn't sound familiar, does it? Ticket price inflation? I'm glad ticket prices have stabilized and they're at a really good... Teams don't even increase tickets anymore. Tickets are just... In fact, I hear they're just going to lower them just because it's fun. And then they talk about the TV rights, ESPN, blah, blah, blah. With the NHL Players Association and owners went to the bargaining table in a bad mood. The players' share of NHL revenues rose to 53%, according to figures released by the league, and the average salary rose from $159,000 to $276,000 in the last 5 years. Average NHL salary. They even have Grant Fuhr in here, who is the best goaltender in the league, was making $500,000. They say the best goalie on earth. And the reason that the Oilers were going to trade him is because they had to pay him $500,000. And Bill Ranford, a Conn Smythe winner 2 years before, made $200,000. Wow. NHL executives warned that small Canadian markets like Winnipeg and Quebec, which are hindered by tough tax laws, may not be able to survive the 1990s if cost inflation continues. But the NHLPA, led by aggressive new director Bob Goodenow, pushed for a much less restrictive form of free agency. Goodenow pointed to the league's $50 million expansion fee as a compelling sign of league prosperity. $50 million. Oh, there's some girls in the background. There you go. All right. My sexuality was commented on in a video earlier this week, and I'm not sure why. Didn't watch the Mandy Leon video, I guess. But with Tampa Bay and Ottawa struggled to make their first, but both Tampa and Ottawa struggled to make their first $22.5 million payment to the league, and viability of both franchises seemed questionable. The expansion fee for Vegas, $500 million. Ottawa and Tampa had a hard time coming up with $22.5 million. And you wonder why the expansion team Vegas is getting is fantastic compared to what Ottawa and Tampa got. The actual value of established NHL franchises seemed closer to $30 million than to the $50 million the league demanded from expansion groups, which is why most qualified bidders balked at meeting the NHL's terms. So most cities looked at that price and went, no, oh, my feet are going to sleep. Oh, I just got even shorter. Look at that. All right. I don't need to be shorter. Okay. The owners and players will almost certainly struggle to get to a mutually beneficial labor contract. Good thing that doesn't happen anymore either. Isn't that nice? Doesn't happen anymore. Yeah, they don't argue at all now. Everybody gets along great. Kumbaya, they just hold hands and sing. The first 2 rounds of talks achieved little, and for the first time in history, the NHL faced the distinct possibility of a player strike. And Bob McKenzie said on TSN today, if you're going to look at the odds of whether or not there's going to be a labor stoppage after this contract's up, bet the over, and he did the thumbs up. So that's really, really encouraging that they would go on strike again after $690 million get handed out on July 1st. I don't understand it. Speaking of player animosity, the league was also under attack by several former stars for its handling of its pension fund. Suits and countersuits were filed. The rhetoric got ugly and further tarnished the league's dismal public image. It's got that all cleaned up too, right? The league's public image is fantastic now, right? Because they're going back to Quebec, right? To make up for what? No, they're not? All right. Lovers of the sport are again wondering, can the NHL continue to prosper in spite of itself? Is the sport and its players great enough to overcome management's lack of vision? This is why I'm reading this today, because look at all the deals that got made today. Management's lack of vision. If the season unfolds without a hitch, it will be fun. Gretzky will center an NHL superline with Yuri Curry and Thomas Sandstrom. Mark Messier should be back at full speed for Edmonton after battling a knee injury last season. The San Jose Sharks will begin play at San Francisco's Cow Palace and will lead the league in merchandise sold, if nothing else. Everybody had Sharks shit the first year. The first year of expansion, everybody had a Sharks jersey. I had one too. I don't anymore. Sent it away. Not because I hated it, but because I found somebody who was a San Jose fan and I sent it to them. With any luck, we'll get to see if Lindros really is the next megastar in the NHL. But this season, the explosive Fedorov or the acrobatic McGillney may steal some of his thunder. If given their chance, NHL teams will truly deliver the best hockey in the world this season. So there's a lot of things in here to look at and say, you know what? The more things change, the more they stay the same. Salaries went up today. There's no way league salaries dropped today. And yet, the cap didn't go up. So what's going to happen is your middle class player, your guy who makes $2 million a year, your Mike Santorellis, they're out. Those middle of the road, third, fourth line guys who do a good job are out. They're the guys who go to Europe now. And it's because all these top line guys get all the money. And then because of the cap world, there's none left. So you give it to entry-level guys, journeymen, and you'll give them a shot at the roster because what they bring to the table is good enough to be fourth line, and it forces other guys out, or it forces them to take an entry-level contract. And it's too bad. It honestly is. Because there's a lot of players who end up in Europe that shouldn't. And there's a lot of guys who lost jobs today that shouldn't have. But when you see all these 6, 7, year deals, and you see $6 million, $7 million a year, somebody's got to pay for that. Now the fans ultimately pay for it in ticket prices. Because, the owners don't do this out of generosity. They do it because the revenues that are coming from merchandise sales, from ticket prices. Back in '92, the big money item they wanted was hockey card sales, which all went to, I believe it was all NHLPA, and then the NHL wanted a cut. And it was a big, big factor leading up to the first strike. And now I would think hockey card sales are an afterthought. That's changed. But it's funny to watch all these salaries and all this term, and somebody's paying the price. So, and I've seen names get mentioned today of guys who didn't get picked up as free agents. Don't be surprised if these guys end up in Europe. Don't be surprised if they're exiled from the NHL for 1 or 2 years. And then come back and then they're fine and they belong in the NHL because somebody has cap room to sign them. But this is the new reality. Your entry-level guys can play in the NHL because they only make $800,000, $900,000 a year. Your star players, well, you're not moving them. Most of them have no movement clauses anyways. And then there's your middle of the road. There's your $2 million guy that you can probably play without. And they lose out. Back in '92, that magazine was made. Those guys had a job in the NHL forever, but waiver rules were different too. And the waiver rules now are such that you may not sign a guy because he's probably a tweener. He may not quite be good enough to be in the NHL all year. And you're going to lose him on waivers, so you won't sign him. So again, those guys get squeezed out. They're gone. You can still sign a guy like, DeFazio, who's free agent out of Boston. He was in Vancouver a few years ago. He's a good farmhand. And you can bring him up and you can waive him and drop him down. Nobody's going to take him on waivers. Because that's his role. But a Santorelli, he'll probably get taken on waivers, and you really, you're better off just to leave your roster as is. Because you can't pencil a guy in that you might end up waiving on October 1st. So it'll be interesting to see how things go from here. It was one of those things I was reading tonight from 1992, and how wrong these experts can be, and how the year's going to go, as they were about the Canucks. 91-92 was a fantastic year. Bure came over halfway through the year, and he tore up the league right away. And 92-93, they continued. They were first that year as well. And 93-94, they went to the final, even though they weren't very good that year. It hid the fact they weren't very good that year until the trade deadline. Jeff Brown. But it's a weird business. And today's one of those days. It just reminds me of that time in history. And how 25 years later, have things changed that much? The money's changed. The money's crazy. 500 grand got you Grant Fuhr 25 years ago. 200 grand got you Conn Smythe winner Bill Ranford. And Fuhr got traded to the Leafs because he was older. He was 28. Ranford was 24. 28. So yeah, I mean, he was 9 years younger than Luongo is right now. And he was considered expendable because he was the older of the two. And he was more expensive. He was 500 grand. Crazy. All right. That's it for me for today.